It's just a flight. What could possibly go wrong? Rachel thought to herself, trying to stay calm as she settled into her seat, baby Sophie on her lap. The plane hummed with the usual buzz of people talking, sipping on their drinks, and flipping through magazines. Rachel's tired eyes scanned the cabin, her mind racing with worries about the next few weeks. Uncertainty loomed over her every decision. She had barely enough money left for rent, let alone the baby formula that Sophie desperately needed. She had to find a new job, but with every door closing, Rachel wasn't sure where to turn. The only thing she could count on was Sophie, who, despite the exhaustion Rachel felt, was her constant source of strength. As she glanced at the seat next to her, she noticed the man sitting there, a tall figure dressed in a sleek suit, his deep blue tie matching the shade of his eyes. He seemed completely out of place among the usual passengers. His presence exuded wealth, confidence, and power. Rachel sighed, wondering how someone like him would even notice her, a struggling single mom. As the flight took off, Rachel shifted in her seat, trying to get Sophie to fall asleep. She bounced her gently, whispering soothing words, but the baby's cries grew louder. The other passengers seemed to grow impatient, throwing looks in her direction. Rachel's face flushed with embarrassment, and for a moment, she considered retreating to the bathroom to avoid further judgment. But just as the tears began to well up, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Let me help," said the man next to her. His voice was calm, soothing, and Rachel felt a strange comfort in it. She looked up at him, hesitant but desperate. He smiled and gently took Sophie into his arms. Within moments, the crying stopped, and Rachel watched in awe as Sophie settled into a peaceful sleep, resting on his shoulder. For the first time in hours, Rachel felt a flicker of relief. The man didn't just calm Sophie. He calmed her too. As she sat there, trying to comprehend what had just happened, she realized something she hadn't thought about before. What if this was the start of something unexpected? When the plane finally landed, Rachel, still lost in her thoughts, slowly gathered her things. But as she stood up to leave, the man stopped her. "I don't usually do this," he said, handing her a business card. "But I think you're someone I'd like to get to know better." Rachel froze, her heart racing. She looked at the card. The name on it was bold, and the title beneath it made her stomach twist. Alex Reed, CEO of Reed Industries. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. "You're the CEO?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "I am, and I think we should talk." Rachel stood frozen in the aisle, the business card still in her hand. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her mind raced. Alex Reed. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. She glanced back at him, still sitting in his seat, his expression calm, almost amused, like he didn't realize how much of a bombshell his words had just dropped. The chaos of the flight, the stares of the other passengers, the tension in her shoulders, it all seemed to disappear in that moment. What was he thinking? Was he serious? Was this some kind of joke? Rachel swallowed, forcing herself to smile politely as she tucked the card into her purse. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She quickly turned and made her way out of the plane, her steps slower than usual as she tried to shake off the surreal feeling. She kept her head down, her mind spinning, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. Outside the terminal, Rachel stood for a moment, the bright airport lights flickering as she took in a shaky breath. This was insane. She was just a single mom, barely scraping by. A CEO, a man with power and wealth, had just offered her his card like it was nothing. Like he didn't know she barely had enough money to feed her baby this week. She had to be imagining things. She walked toward the exit, her thoughts swirling. What kind of person would give someone like her a business card? Someone who worked 3 jobs just to make ends meet, who had to beg for help when Sophie needed something as simple as formula. She hadn't even been able to buy Sophie new clothes in months. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she paused for a moment, looking around the busy parking lot. She should have been grateful for the kindness, but the idea of accepting it, of accepting help from someone like him, made her feel like she was falling into a world that wasn't hers, a world she didn't belong in. The next morning, Rachel found herself staring at the business card in her kitchen, the light from the window casting a faint glow over the sleek black surface. The name seemed to stare back at her. Alex Reed. Reed Industries. It all felt too much. But then, in the back of her mind, a tiny voice asked her, what if? What if this was the opportunity she had been waiting for? What if this was her chance to turn things around? Rachel felt a lump form in her throat as she thought about Sophie and the future she wanted for her. She couldn't keep going the way she had been. She needed help. Maybe Alex could offer something that wasn't just charity. Maybe he could offer a real chance. Taking a deep breath, she picked up the phone and dialed the number on the back of the card. The line rang twice before it was picked up. Hello. A smooth, professional voice greeted her. This is Rachel Morgan. I was hoping to speak with Mr. Reed. There was a brief pause. This is Alex's assistant. I'll let him know you called. He'll be expecting your call. Rachel's stomach fluttered as she hung up the phone, the weight of the moment settling in. She had just taken the first step. Now, there was no turning back. Rachel paced nervously in her small apartment the next morning, her fingers tapping against the worn kitchen counter. It had been hours since she'd made the call to Alex's assistant, and the knot in her stomach hadn't loosened. She glanced at Sophie, who was playing with her toys in the corner, blissfully unaware of the weight pressing on her mother's shoulders. This was it. A chance. The chance she'd been waiting for. But could she really take it? Could she walk into the world of billionaires and CEOs without falling flat on her face? Her phone rang, cutting through her thoughts. The caller ID read Reed Industries. Her heart skipped a beat as she answered. Hello, she said, her voice shaky. Ms. Morgan, this is Alex Reed's assistant. Mr. Reed will be expecting you at his office at 2 p.m. today. Please make sure to bring your ID and arrive a few minutes early, the assistant said in a calm, professional tone. Rachel's mind raced, but she forced herself to nod, even though the voice on the other end couldn't see her. Thank you. I'll be there, she replied. She hung up and stood still for a moment, letting the silence fill the room. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She couldn't back out now. The door to a better future was opening in front of her, and all she had to do was walk through it. Rachel glanced at Sophie, who looked up at her with a bright smile, and something shifted inside her. Sophie deserved a mother who could give her a future without fear, without always struggling to make ends meet. With newfound determination, Rachel grabbed her purse and a jacket she'd barely worn. She didn't have much, but she could make herself presentable. At 1:30 p.m., Rachel arrived at Reed Industries' towering office building in downtown New York. The building loomed above her, a symbol of the world she barely understood. She stepped inside, the cool air inside the lobby a sharp contrast to the heat of her nervousness. The receptionist gave her a polite smile as she checked in. Mr. Reed is expecting you. Please take the elevator to the top floor, the receptionist instructed. Rachel nodded, her heart pounding louder in her chest with each passing second. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. As the doors opened on the top floor, she stepped out into a sleek, modern office space, the kind she'd only ever seen in magazines or on TV. Everything about it screamed power and success. She was escorted to a waiting area where a woman with dark, sharply cut hair and a polished suit stood. Ms. Morgan, the woman said, her voice cold but not unfriendly. Mr. Reed will be with you shortly. Rachel sat down, trying to steady her breath. The walls seemed to close in as she waited, her nerves jumping from one thought to the next. What was this meeting really about? Was it just a formality? Or was Alex actually going to offer her something real? The door to the office opened, and Alex Reed walked in. His presence filled the room immediately, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her feel both seen and unseen at the same time. Ms. Morgan, he said with a calm smile, offering her his hand. I'm glad you could make it. Rachel stood up, her hand trembling slightly as she shook his. Thank you for having me, she said, her voice more confident than she felt. Please, have a seat. Alex gestured to the chair across from his desk. Rachel sat down, her heart still racing, but she refused to let the fear control her. She had to be strong, for Sophie. I've been reviewing your resume and background, Alex said, leaning back in his chair. You've had a tough time, I can see that. But I think you've got potential. Tell me, what would you do if I offered you a job? Rachel blinked, taken aback by the directness of the question. A job? He was serious. The words hung in the air like a dream she wasn't sure she could touch. I'd take it, Rachel answered, her voice barely above a whisper. I'd take anything. I just want a chance. A real chance. Alex studied her for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. Then, slowly, he nodded. I believe you would. And that's why I'm offering you the position. Rachel, the position. Alex's office felt different now. The initial shock of the business card and the grand building had faded, replaced by the weight of reality. Rachel sat across from him, feeling the space between them charged with expectation. She had come into this meeting thinking it would be another dead-end interview, another chance to feel rejected, but now, the future was standing right in front of her. Alex's eyes were focused on her, his gaze steady, almost searching. The silence stretched, heavy with the unspoken words they were both grappling with. Finally, Alex broke the silence. I'm offering you a position here, Rachel. It's a junior assistant role to start, but there's room for growth. I can see you have potential, and I want to see where it can take you. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of something else beneath it, something Rachel couldn't quite put her finger on. You'll be working directly under my executive team, handling communications, scheduling, and a few other responsibilities. I need someone who can keep up with the pace here. Can you do that? Rachel took a deep breath, her mind racing. The offer was too much to process, too overwhelming. A junior assistant. She had worked worse jobs, with less pay, juggling more hours than she ever thought possible. But this was different. This wasn't just another job. This was an opportunity to change everything. For Sophie. For herself. I can do it, Rachel said firmly, her voice stronger than it had been in days. I'll do whatever it takes. Alex nodded, as if he expected no less. He pushed a folder across the desk toward her. This is the contract. Take your time to look it over, but we're moving fast. I'm expecting someone who can jump in right away. Rachel picked up the contract, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages. Everything was laid out clearly, the terms, the salary, the expectations. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had ever had. As she signed the contract, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. This wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. Welcome aboard, Rachel, Alex said, his voice warm. I'm glad to have you here. Rachel stood up, shaking his hand, her heart still racing. She had just made a decision that could change her life. But as she looked at him, standing behind his desk with that calm confidence, she realized that this was just the beginning. The world she had once thought unreachable was now within her grasp. She had a job, a future, and for the first time in a long while, a sense of hope. As she walked out of his office, the weight of the world didn't feel so heavy anymore. Sophie had a future, and Rachel was going to fight to make sure it was a good one. Rachel sat at her desk, staring at the presentation slides in front of her. She had been working on this project for days, pouring every ounce of energy into it. This was her chance, her moment to prove that she could do this. The pressure weighed heavily on her, but it also fueled her determination. Sophie was with her mother for the evening, and for the first time in a long while, Rachel had a few hours to focus solely on her work. As the clock ticked down to the presentation, her nerves began to creep in. She checked the time again, 10 minutes before the meeting started. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was doing this. She had been given an opportunity, and she couldn't let it slip away. Alex had given her this responsibility, trusted her with something important. That meant something. The conference room was already filled with executives from various departments, all of them seated around a large table, waiting for the presentation to begin. As Rachel walked in, Alex's eyes met hers. His calm gaze gave her a boost of confidence, even if it was only temporary. She took her place at the front of the room, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the projector. All right, everyone, let's get started, she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the nerves bubbling underneath. As she began her presentation, the words came out easier than she expected. She had spent so much time preparing for this moment that the facts and figures seemed to flow naturally. She glanced at the faces in the room, some attentive, some skeptical. But as the minutes ticked by, the tension started to melt away. Rachel knew her material. She had worked hard for this. By the time she reached the conclusion, she could see Alex nodding, and a few others were leaning in, their interest piqued. The final slide appeared on the screen. Thank you for your time. She took a deep breath, her heart still racing, and waited for the feedback. There was a moment of silence before one of the executives spoke up. Impressive, he said. You've clearly done your homework. Rachel let out a quiet sigh of relief, but she didn't let herself get complacent. Alex was still watching, his expression unreadable, but there was a faint smile on his lips. "Well done, Rachel," he said, standing up as the room erupted into applause. "I'm impressed." Rachel smiled, a rush of pride flooding her chest. She had done it. She had proven herself. The journey wasn't over, but she had crossed a major hurdle. As she walked out of the conference room, her confidence grew with every step. This was just the beginning. Rachel walked out of the conference room, her heart still racing from the presentation. She had done it. She had proven herself. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged. Alex's words echoed in her mind as she made her way back to her desk. "Well done, Rachel." The words made her smile, but she wasn't done yet. She couldn't afford to rest on her laurels. She had to keep moving forward. Her phone buzzed with a new email from Alex. "Great job today. I'll be in touch about the next steps." It was brief, but it was enough to send a wave of excitement through her. She had made an impression. As the day went on, Rachel found herself thinking more about Alex. He had been kind, supportive even, in a way that she hadn't expected from someone in his position. He had shown genuine interest in her work, and that made a difference. But there was something else there, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. It wasn't just professional respect. The way he had looked at her during the presentation, the way his gaze lingered just a little longer than necessary. It was different. It made her uneasy, but also curious. The next few days flew by in a whirlwind of meetings, emails, and new tasks. Rachel worked tirelessly, pushing herself to keep up with the fast pace of the company. She couldn't afford to make mistakes now. She had been given this chance, and she was determined to prove she deserved it. But even as she focused on her work, her thoughts kept drifting back to Alex. There was something about him that intrigued her, something that made her want to know more. It wasn't just his success or his charm. It was the way he made her feel like she was more than just an assistant, more than just a single mother struggling to get by. She felt like she was being seen. One evening, as she was finishing up a report, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Alex. "I'll be at the office late tonight. Would you be interested in grabbing a coffee after work?" Rachel stared at the message for a moment, unsure of how to respond. She had never thought about Alex in that way, but the invitation felt genuine. It wasn't a date, she told herself. It was just coffee, a chance to talk. But why did it feel so different? She hesitated for a moment before typing back. "Sure, I'd like that." A few hours later, Rachel found herself standing in a quiet corner of a small cafe, waiting for Alex. Her nerves were getting the best of her, but she pushed them aside. This was just coffee, nothing more. When Alex walked in, he greeted her with a warm smile. "I'm glad you came," he said as they sat down. The conversation started off light, about work, about life, and slowly, it deepened. As they talked, Rachel felt herself opening up in a way she hadn't in years. She talked about Sophie, about her struggles, about the fear that had kept her from chasing her dreams. Alex listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. There was no judgment, just understanding. By the time they finished their coffee, Rachel felt something she hadn't expected, a connection. It wasn't just about the job or the opportunity anymore. It was about something real, something deeper. And as they parted ways that night, Rachel couldn't help but wonder what the future held. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Rachel arrived at work the next day with a new sense of clarity. The dinner with Alex had left her feeling lighter, more confident. It was strange. She had always been so focused on surviving, on keeping her head above water. But now, with Alex's kindness and attention, she felt like there might actually be a future ahead of her. The morning passed quickly, filled with emails and meetings. She was settling into her role more and more, finding her rhythm at Reed Industries. But her mind kept drifting back to Alex. They had spent hours talking the night before, and there was something about the way he listened to her, really listened, that made her feel seen. Rachel had been so used to being invisible, to feeling like she was always fighting to be heard. But with Alex, it was different. He made her feel like her thoughts and feelings mattered. As the day wore on, Rachel's thoughts turned to Sophie. She couldn't help but think about the life she wanted to give her daughter. A life where they didn't have to struggle every day, where Rachel didn't have to constantly choose between paying bills and buying groceries. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she wasn't alone anymore. She had a support system now, people who cared about her. Alex was one of those people. Later that afternoon, Rachel was in the middle of preparing a report when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Alex. I was thinking of you today. How about dinner tonight? Just the two of us again. I'd love to see you. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if it was the nerves or excitement, but the invitation felt different this time. It wasn't just about the job or the company anymore. It was about something more personal, more real. She quickly typed back, her fingers trembling slightly. I'd like that. I'll see you at 7. That evening, Rachel arrived at the restaurant a little earlier than usual. She sat at the same table where they had shared their first dinner, her mind racing with thoughts of what this might mean. Was this just another casual dinner, or was it something more? When Alex walked in, he looked even more confident than usual, his smile lighting up the room. You look beautiful, he said, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. Rachel smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Thank you, she replied, her voice soft. They spent the evening talking, but this time, the conversation was different. It was deeper, more intimate. They talked about their pasts, their hopes for the future, and everything in between. Rachel found herself opening up in a way she hadn't expected, and Alex listened without interruption, his presence comforting. As the evening came to a close, Rachel realized something. She wasn't just grateful for the opportunity Alex had given her at Reed Industries. She was beginning to care about him in a way she hadn't anticipated. As they stood up to leave, Alex took her hand gently. I'm glad we did this again, he said, his voice sincere. Rachel smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. Me too, she whispered. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the brink of something real, something worth fighting for. And as she walked out of the restaurant with Alex by her side, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready for it.